From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Mr. President!
It doesn't concern you that many people saw that tweet as racist and that white nationalist groups are finding common cause with you on that point?
It doesn't concern me because many people agree with me. And all I'm saying, they want to leave, they can leave.
President Trump doubles down on his racist attacks against Congress members Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. On Monday, they responded.
This is a president who has openly violated the very value our country aspires to uphold. Equality under the law, religious liberty, equal protection, and protection from persecution. And to distract from that, he's launching a blatantly racist attack on 4 duly elected members of the United States House of Representatives, all of whom are women of color.
The House is set to vote today on a resolution condemning Trump's attacks. Then we'll speak with Julian Castro, the presidential candidate who says Trump is acting like a white supremacist and is calling for the breakup of ICE.
Let's be very clear. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it.
Julian Castro will join us from Davenport, Iowa. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Trump administration announced it would block nearly all migrants from seeking asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border Monday in a new rule that violates both domestic and international law. The ACLU has already vowed to challenge the rule in court. It would deny asylum to any migrant who failed to apply for protection in another country they pass through on the way to the U.S. border, including children traveling alone. If enacted, it would effectively block people from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and other countries from seeking refuge in the United States. Trump announced the plan without Guatemala and Mexico's agreement. President Trump doubled down Monday on his attacks against 4 progressive congresswomen of color, saying, if you're not happy here, you can leave. He was widely condemned for a tweet Sunday that told the Congress members to, quote, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came. The tweets were aimed at Congress members Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, all of whom are U.S. citizens. The 4 congresswomen spoke out at a news conference on Monday. This is Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts.
Despite the occupant of the White House attempts to marginalize us and to silence us, please know that we are more than 4 people. We ran on a mandate to advocate for and to represent those ignored, left out, and left behind. Our squad is big. Our squad includes any person committed to building a more equitable and just world. And that is the work that we want to get back to.
The House of Representatives voting today on a resolution to condemn Trump's attacks. We'll have more on the story and from yesterday's news conference after headlines. Calls are mounting for Puerto Rico's Governor Ricardo Rosselló to resign following a leak of nearly 900 pages of text messages by the Puerto Rico Center for Investigative Journalism. The messages reveal sexist, homophobic, violent content exchanged between Rosselló and government officials. In one exchange, the governor jokes about shooting San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz and called former New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, who's an ally of Yulín Cruz, a whore. Rosselló also took aim at the federally appointed Financial Oversight Board charged with managing the island's debt crisis, writing, quote, "Dear Oversight Board, go F yourself," and made jokes about victims of Hurricane Maria. 2 top officials resigned as the scandal broke, but Rosselló, who is up for re-election next year, is resisting calls to step down. On Monday, Dennis Marquez of the Puerto Rican Independence Party introduced formal complaints against the governor and called for his impeachment. Thousands of protesters have been taking to the streets in Puerto Rico.
It was time for Puerto Rico to wake up and rise up against the oppressors, and we want to force the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló. He does not deserve the job he has, and the people have spoken. Even if the legislatures does not care one dime about the people, they are there because of us, and we're showing them, giving them a lesson that they have to remember we pay their wages.
On Monday, police in San Juan tear-gassed demonstrators and made multiple arrests. Puerto Ricans also gathered in New York and other cities in support of the island. More protests are planned for today. In El Salvador, a rape survivor who was jailed and later freed after she had a stillbirth is being retried for aggravated homicide. In 2017, Evelyn Hernandez was sentenced to 30 years in prison for suspected abortion after her stillbirth. But in December last year, the 21-year-old's conviction was annulled. El Salvador is one of 6 countries in Latin America with a total abortion ban. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro is rejecting the findings of a recent UN report in which Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet accuses special forces of carrying out thousands of extrajudicial killings that were, quote, aimed at neutralizing, repressing, and criminalizing political opponents and people critical of the government, unquote. Nearly 7,000 people were killed over 2018 and 19, according to the report, though some say that number may be conservative. Witnesses say special action forces regularly target political opponents and critics, often staging the scene them after they kill them to implicate them in fabricated drug crimes. Special forces agents have also been accused of sexually assaulting women. Back in the U.S., activists around the country took to the streets Monday to protest Amazon, coinciding with Prime Day, one of the retail giant's biggest sales days of the year. Activists in Seattle delivered a petition with over 270,000 signatures to Amazon headquarters, calling for them to stop collaborating with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and calling out its exploitation of workers and anti-union record. In New York, activists delivered the petition to the home of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. In Minnesota, workers at an Amazon warehouse, many of whom are immigrants from East African nations, walked out for a 6-hour strike and demanded Amazon implement better working conditions and corporate responsibility policies. In Europe, workers in Germany, Britain, Spain, and Poland are also taking part in protests this week, calling for fair wages and working conditions. A man was fatally shot Saturday after apparently attempting to set deportation buses on fire outside the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington. 69-year-old Willem van Spronsen had protested before against the mistreatment of immigrants at the facility run by the private company Geo Group. Journalist and activist Sean King called van Spronsen the first martyr in the fight against immigrant detention. Immigrant rights group La Resistencia said, quote, Van Spronsen's actions sadly reflect the level of desperation people across this country feel about the government's outrageous violence against immigrants, which includes the use of detention centers to cage migrants both currently living in the U.S. and those seeking asylum. This death results from the federal government's unresponsiveness to the anger and despair people feel at the horrors unfolding both at the border and in the interior, and from the inability of officers to de-escalate rather than shooting to kill, unquote. Tributes are pouring in for Sadie Roberts Joseph, a prominent African-American historian and civil rights activist whose body was discovered in the trunk of her car in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Friday. Authorities said Monday the cause of the death was homicide by asphyxiation, though few other details are known. Roberts Joseph founded the Odell S. Williams Now and Then African-American Museum and hosted Baton Rouge's annual celebration of Juneteenth, which she fought to have recognized as a Louisiana state and national holiday. She also founded a local nonprofit combating drugs and violence. The NAACP of Baton Rouge wrote in a Facebook tribute, "We lost a cultural legend yesterday. Rest in peace, Sadie Roberts Joseph," the group wrote. From reviving Juneteenth to the culture preserved at her museum, she was a trendsetter and an icon in this city. 2 of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers gave testimony at a hearing Monday, urging the judge not to grant him bail. Courtney Wild, who says Epstein started sexually abusing her at the age of 14, told the court he's a scary person to have walking the streets. Meanwhile, prosecutors revealed investigators discovered piles of cash, stashes of diamonds, and an expired passport under another name and with a Saudi address when they raided Epstein's Manhattan mansion last week. On Friday, they accused the serial child sex abuser of possible witness tampering, saying he made payments totaling $350,000 $250,000 to two people he feared could testify against him in court. And in Hawaii, hundreds of land defenders are protesting the construction of the contested 30-meter telescope on top of Mauna Kea, which is considered a sacred native site. Activists say the construction of the telescope was approved without consulting the local native community. Monday morning, protesters chained themselves at the base of the mountain's road. Imai Winchester, who took part in the action, told NPR they hope to inform people of the, quote, desecration of our lands and the failure of the state and its agencies to properly manage something that's important, unquote. The ACLU of Hawaii is warning enforcement authorities must respect the rights of protesters and has threatened to sue if sound cannons are deployed. More direct actions are planned today and through the week. This is Democracy Now! Those are some of the headlines. Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our viewers and listeners across the country and around the world. President Trump is doubling down after he was widely condemned for his racist attack on 4 progressive congresswomen of color in a series of tweets that began Sunday and told them to, quote, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came. The tweets were aimed at Congress members Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, who are known as the Squad. All 4 are U.S. citizens, and 3 of the 4 were born in the United States. Ilhan Omar was born in Somalia before coming to the U.S. as a refugee at age 12. On Monday, Trump added a new insult, saying Omar was an al-Qaeda sympathizer, a false claim she said she would not dignify with an answer. During a Made in America showcase at the White House, the president refused to back down when reporters asked him about the controversy.
Mr. President,
Does it concern you that many people saw that tweet as racist and that white nationalist groups are finding common cause with you on that point?
It doesn't concern me because many people agree with me. And all I'm saying, they want to leave, they can leave.
That was President Trump standing outside the White House. His Twitter tirade also named House Speaker Pelosi and comes on the heels of her public feud with the 4 Congress members following last month's passage of the contested border funding bill, which they opposed. Pelosi said that House would vote as early as today on a resolution that, quote, strongly condemns President Donald Trump's racist comments and says they've legitimized and increased fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color. This morning, Trump pushed back against the resolution, tweeting the Congresswomen, quote, have been spewing some of the most vile, hateful and disgusting things ever said by a politician in the House or Senate, and yet they get a free pass and a big embrace from the Democratic Party. He added, why isn't the House voting to rebuke the filthy and hate-laced things they've said? Because they're the radical left and the Democrats are afraid to take them on. Well, on Monday, the Squad appeared together for a news conference in response to Trump's assaults. Here now are their full comments, starting with Congressmember Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts.
I want to send a message of gratitude and thanks to the solidarity that we have received from every corner of our country, from our colleagues to our neighbors. We are grateful for your solidarity, your encouragement, and your support in the face of the most recent xenophobic, bigoted remarks from the occupant of our White House. I will always refer to him as the occupant, as he is only occupying space. He does not embody the grace, the empathy, the compassion, the integrity that office requires and that the American people deserve. That being said, I encourage the American people and all of us in this room and beyond to not take the bait. This is a disruptive distraction from the issues of care, concern, and consequence to the American people. That we were sent here with a decisive mandate from our constituents to work on. Everything from reducing the cost of prescription drugs, to addressing our affordable housing crisis, to ensuring that the American people have more than health insurance, but health care. More recently, thanks to the partnership of Chairman Elijah Cummings and the advocacy of myself and a coalition of advocates I've worked with for decades, we held the first hearing on childhood trauma. And in sitting in that hearing, as we heard about the many manifestations and iterations of childhood trauma, in the wake of the public health crisis and epidemic that is gun violence, in the wake of PTSD, in the wake of those battling substance abuse disorder and a host of other things, it was impossible not to think of the trauma that is being inflicted upon children every day at our border. At the end of the day, if we improve the conditions of children in a cage, they are still in a cage. And we are viscerally, vigorously, and fundamentally opposed to the criminalizing, the vilifying, the mass detention and deportation of migrant families who are simply doing what is their legal human right, and that is to seek asylum. In the tradition of who we say we are as a country, a beacon of light and hope and of refuge. This is simply a disruption and a distraction from the callous, chaotic, and corrupt culture of this administration all the way down. We want to get back to the business of the American people and why we were sent here, reducing the cost of prescription drugs, addressing the public health crisis and epidemic that is gun violence, addressing the racial wealth gap, and yes, making sure that families stay together. I also would like to just underscore the fact that despite the occupant of the White House attempts to marginalize us and to silence us, please know that we are more than 4 people. We ran on a mandate to advocate for and to represent those ignored, left out, and left behind. Our squad is big. Our squad includes any person committed to building a more equitable and just world. And that is the work that we want to get back to. And given the size of this squad and this great nation, we will not be silenced. And now I'll invite Representative Omar to offer a few words as well.
This country was founded on the radical idea that we are created equal and endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. And yes, we have a long way before we fully live up to those values. It is for this reason precisely that we have to take action when a president is openly violating the oath he took to the Constitution of the United States and the core values we aspire to. As Martin Luther King said, all we say to America is, be true to what you say on paper. I believe this is a pivotal moment in our country. The eyes of history is watching us. Right now, the president is carrying out mass deportation raids across this country in each one of our districts. Right now, the president is committing human rights abuses at the border, keeping children in cages, and having human beings drinking out of toilets. This president, who has been credibly accused of committing multiple crimes, including colluding with foreign government to interfere with our election. This is a president who has overseen the most corrupt administration in our history and pursued an agenda to allow millions of Americans to die from a lack of health care while he transfers millions of dollars in tax cuts to corporations. This is a president who has said, grab women by the pussy. This is a president who's called black athletes sons of. This is a president who has called black people who come from black and brown countries holes. This is a president who has equated neo-Nazis with those who protest against them in Charlottesville. This is a president who has openly violated the very value our country aspires to uphold: equality under the law, religious liberty, equal protection, and protection from persecution. And to distract from that, he's launching a blatantly racist attack on 4 duly elected members of the United States House of Representatives, all of whom are women of color. This is the agenda of white nationalists. Whether it is happening in chat rooms or it's happening on national TV, and now it's reached the White House garden. He would love nothing more than to divide our country based on race, religion, gender, orientation, or immigration status. Because this is the only way he knows he can prevent the solidarity of us working together across all of our differences. The only way to prevent us confronting the problems our country is facing, whether it is healthcare, climate change, student debt, or our endless wars. This is his plan to pit us against one another. This is how he can continue to enrich his friends and distract us from the detrimental policies that his administration is pushing forth. So we can either continue to enable this president and report on the pile of garbage that comes out of his mouth, or we can hold him accountable to his crimes. We can continue to turn a blind eye of the multiple crimes he's accused of. We can stand while he violates people's basic human rights and the responsibility that his administration has for the deaths of children on our border, or we can take action. I have not made impeachment central to my election or my tenure, but since the day that I'd gotten elected, I'd said to people, it is not if he will be impeached, but when. So it is time for us to stop allowing this president to make a mockery out of our Constitution. It's time for us to impeach this president. So now we're going to have Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
I'll try to keep things as brief, I guess, as I can, but who knows when I get on a roll, right? When I was a little girl, my father took me to the reflecting pool here. We were on a road trip from New York to Florida to visit family. And I've told this story before, but it was my first time ever visiting Washington, D.C. And it was my only time visiting Washington, D.C. for years, if not decades. And he rested me on the side of the reflecting pool and had my toes dip in the water. And he had me look at the Washington Monument, had me look at the Capitol, had me look at the entirety of the capital of our great country. And he looked at everything and he pointed to all of it and he said, this belongs to all of us. This belongs to you and it belongs to me. And so the first note that I want to tell children across this country is that no matter what the president says, this country belongs to you. Mm-hmm. And it belongs to everyone. And today, that very notion was challenged. This weekend, that very notion was challenged. So I am not surprised when the president says that 4 sitting members of Congress should, quote, go back to their own country when he has authorized raids without warrants on thousands of families across this country. I am not surprised that he uses the rhetoric that he does when he violates international human rights and takes thousands of children away from their families. I am not surprised that he has turned our public education system under the leadership of Betsy DeVos into a cash cow to enrich himself and his friends. I am not surprised when he corrupts via the Secretary of Transportation. I am not surprised at what he's doing. But I also know that we're focused on making it better, because we don't leave the things that we love. And when we love this country, what that means is that we propose the solutions to fix it. We love all people in this country, and that's why we believe health care is a human right. We love all children in this country, and because we do, that's why we fight for education for all children through college. And so we'll stay focused on our agenda, and we won't get caught slipping, because all of this is a distraction. It's a distraction from what's most important and from our core values as American citizens. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rashida Tlaib.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to my sisters in service. Thank you all so much for being here. As we all know, the recent tweets and words from the president are simply a continuation of his racist and xenophobic playbook. We cannot allow these hateful actions by the president to distract us from the critical work to hold this administration accountable to the inhumane conditions at the border that is separating children from their loved ones and caging them up in illegal, horrific conditions. I represent the third poorest congressional district in this country, one that is made of working people who have been targeted by this administration, and their actions and words are hurting them today. I was elected to fight for them, fight for the 13th congressional district. They sent me here to Congress to fight back against the corporate assault and the corruption in our country. This means supporting an impeachment inquiry of this president and his actions by the administration and his appointees. Sadly, this is not the first, nor will it be the last time we hear disgusting, bigoted language from the president. We know this is who he is, and we know that he and his administration are constantly engaged in actions that harm residents and American people in our country. Many members of Congress have called for his impeachment because of his utter disregard and disrespect of the United States Constitution. And despite this and other many attempts to distract us, I remain focused. We remain focused on holding him accountable to the laws of this land and accountable to the American people. I urge House leadership, many of my colleagues, to take action to impeach this lawless president today.
Congress members Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ilhan Omar responding to Trump's racist attacks. When we come back, we'll speak with Julian Castro, the Democratic presidential candidate, who says Trump is acting like a white supremacist. Julian Castro has also called for the breaking up of ICE. Stay with us. Respect by Aretha Franklin. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, we continue to look at President Trump's racist attack on progressive women of color in Congress as the House of Representatives prepares to vote on a resolution condemning Trump's tweets, telling Representatives Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to, quote, go back to where they came from. All four Congresswomen are American citizens. Trump's racist words have been condemned by virtually all of the 2020 Democratic presidential contenders, who are calling his attack hateful, un-American, xenophobic, and cowardly.
To talk more about this, immigration, and other issues, we're going to Davenport, Iowa right now, where we're joined by a 2020 presidential candidate who's calling Trump out for acting like a white supremacist. Julian Castro was the youngest member of Obama's cabinet, where he served as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Castro was mayor of San Antonio, Texas, from 2009 to 2014. He is also the identical twin of the head of the Hispanic Congressional Caucus, Joaquin Castro, who just led a delegation to the border detention centers and child jails. Well, Secretary Castro, welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Let's start off by talking about this vote that's about to happen in the House right now, condemning Trump's racism as he singles out these 4 women of color and tells them to go back to where they came from. Can you respond?
I'm glad to see that so many congressional representatives are stepping up today and condemning President Trump's racist language. This is nothing new for this president. We know that he launched this campaign by inciting racial division, and this is called racial priming. We haven't seen a politician in a long time who has built his career on hate and bigotry and trying to divide people along racial and ethnic lines as this president has, whether it was failing to immediately condemn those neo-Nazis in Charlottesville early in his tenure, or talking about the inability of a judge to do his job because, quote, he's Mexican, or the way that he started off his campaign by saying that Mexico was sending drug runners and rapists, and that maybe some of them were also good people. This is a president that knows what he's doing. This is his strategy. This is his politics. This is how he thinks he won the 2016 election with a narrow electoral college victory. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that he kicked off his 2020 campaign just a couple of weeks ago, and already he's at it again.
Well, Secretary Castro, the president's attacks on the 4 congresswomen come as his administration has announced that it would block nearly all migrants from seeking asylum in the U.S. In a new rule that violates both domestic and international law. The rule, which the ACLU has already vowed to challenge in court, would deny asylum to any migrant who failed to apply for protection in another country they passed through on the way to the U.S. border, including children traveling alone. And if it's enacted, it would effectively block people from Honduras, Salvador, and Guatemala from seeking refuge in the United States. I'm wondering your sense of this proposal of the administration.
It's unconstitutional. I believe that this is going to be overturned in the courts. Obviously happy to see the continued great work that the ACLU and others are doing on this. This is a president that promised his base that he was going to do something about this, quote, immigration problem. And he has irrationally and in a bigoted way, I believe, continued to try and stoke that base with his Muslim travel ban, with this latest action. But at the same time, he's actually failed on this issue. What we should have done, what he should have done from day one of his administration, is actually work with Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador in a positive and productive way as much as we can, so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of having to come to the southern border of the United States. But those who make it to the southern border of the United States should absolutely be able to make their asylum claim. If I were president right now, I would immediately end this Remain in Mexico policy, the metering policy, which is basically playing games with people at ports of entry who want to make their asylum claim. We need an immigration policy that actually looks forward and honors asylum claims and sticks to our tradition in the United States of honoring those claims instead of this erratic, haphazard, and I believe bigoted approach that the president is taking.
You have called this past weekend at the Netroots Nation conference in Philadelphia. You called for the breakup of ICE rather than the breakup of families. Explain exactly how you would go about doing this as president.
Well, I don't have to tell y'all or any of the folks watching that ICE has had massive problems as a division of the federal government. Let's begin by acknowledging that this is not a long-established agency. It was established right post 9/11, 2002, 2003. About a year and a half ago, 19 people who work for ICE wrote a letter. This was unprecedented. 19 employees wrote a letter and said that ICE is not functioning the way that it should, that it's failing. And so what I would do is I would actually break apart ICE. I would separate what is now Homeland Security investigations from the enforcement aspect of ICE, because I believe that we need a total culture change and a totally different approach on enforcement. I would put that back within the Department of Justice, those enforcement actions, and change the way that we do enforcement. I don't believe that we should have folks going on Greyhound buses up to 100 miles away from the border, people that are profiling, waiting outside of airline flights as they get into an airport. We need to do this differently. We also don't need to terrorize families, immigrant families, through threatening ICE raids, which is what this president is doing. So I would separate that function. There would no longer be an ICE as we know it. There would be a changed, better, more effective, but more humane and compassionate enforcement than we have now.
Secretary Castro, if we can, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your impulse to decide to run for president and some of your own history, which maybe a lot of people who are watching this show or listening to the show don't know that history. Your mother was a major activist in the Mexican-American community, Rosie Castro. She was a member of Mayo, the Mexican-American Youth Organization. She was one of the co-founders with Jose Angel Gutierrez of La Raza Unida Party. And there's some that say she was much more radical than her two sons, who have become more liberal or progressive Democrats, but not necessarily in the mother's mold. I'm wondering if you could talk about your mother's influence on your politics and your involvement, and how she's regarding your race.
You're right. You know, when my mother was young, she was a hellraiser. She grew up in a time with my grandmother, who raised her as a single parent, when she saw a tremendous amount of discrimination against the Mexican-American community in South Texas. She was growing up in San Antonio, and her way of dealing with that was to get politically active. And she got active first in the Young Democrats and then in a number of organizations, including the Raza Unida Party, which was a third party at the time that said, hey, look, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans are ensuring that this Mexican-American community is able to do basic things like have a decent quality of life, get a good education, pursue decent job opportunities. And so I'm proud of my mother's activism, because I know that it's in part because of her activism and the activism of so many other folks that we have made some progress in this country. But I also understand that we still have a lot of progress to make. In fact, when my mom was 23, she ran for city council with this slate called the Committee for Barrio Betterment. And I still have their poster. It was the first thing that I put into my office when I became mayor at City Hall and when I became Secretary of HUD in the Obama administration. Their slogan was, give government back to the people. And it reminds us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's so many of the things that folks are fighting for back then that we still need to accomplish today, whether it's ensuring that people can get a good education, ensuring in our criminal justice system that just because you're poor or you're a person of color, that you can get good representation and you can get justice, and making sure that we're able to push back against politicians like Donald Trump that clearly use racial division to profit politically.
And given that social justice bent, you're one of the few presidential contenders among the Democrats that phrased the issue of homelessness in America. And could you talk about why you feel that's important to debate and what you would do as president to essentially deal with an epidemic of homelessness that's occurring across the country?
Well, I see housing as a human right. I don't believe that there's any reason, just like there's no reason in the wealthiest nation on earth that anybody should ever go without health care in this country. there's no reason that anybody should go without a basic, safe, decent place to live in our country. And I saw how we can make progress on homelessness. During the Obama administration, the administration set a goal of ending veteran homelessness. And between 2010 and 2016, it was reduced by 47%. We almost cut it in half in 6 years. I believe, and my plan calls for, that we can end homelessness, family homelessness, chronic homelessness, youth homelessness by 2028 if all of us work together to make the right investments in driving down those numbers. It's important to me because where I come at this is that we need a basic respect for all human beings, whether it's through their health care or housing. And that's what's missing in this administration. You can see that when you look at these images of men kept basically in cages and children not given toothbrushes or soap or basic things that they need and separated cruelly from their parents. We need to return to a basic respect and compassion for people that is sorely missing right now.
Secretary Castro, what made you decide to run now for president, as opposed to, for example, running for senator from Texas, perhaps against Senator Kyle?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, that my experience is originally as mayor of San Antonio in local government, and then as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development as a federal executive. And so I see my experience as directly related as a federal executive to the office of the president, which is what you are, a federal executive. On top of that, like a lot of Americans, I see that we need a complete change in leadership in the Oval Office, and I believe that people are ready for a new generation of leadership, that this is the right opportunity. And I also feel very blessed with the opportunities that I've had in this country. And during my whole time in public service, the thing that I've been focused on is making sure that no matter who you are in this country, that you could have the same kind of opportunities that my brother Joaquin and I were able to have so that you can reach your dreams. And when I get out there and talk to people throughout the United States, whether here in Iowa or in my home state of Texas or wherever they are, whoever they are, I always talk about keeping my eye on the ball to make sure that no matter how much money they have or don't have or their background, that I'm going to work hard for them so that they can achieve their American dream too. I believe that if we pursue the right kind of investments, if we pursue a basic respect and compassion for people and the social and racial justice that we need to continue pursuing, that we can achieve that.
We're talking with Democratic presidential candidate Julian Castro. He's in Davenport, Iowa. We're going to talk to him about the McDonald's workers' protests this week, as well as his positions on Amazon, and continue to talk about immigration and his being hailed as the kind of breakout star, perhaps along with Elizabeth Warren, in that first debate of the Democratic presidential primaries that just took place. This is Democracy Now! We'll continue with Julian Castro in Davenport, Iowa, in a minute.
Wonderful every day. It could be wonderful every day. Every day. It could be every day. It could be every day. Every day. It could be. Down the street, wonderful. Everybody that you meet has an original point of view. Every day it could be wonderful. Every day. And I say, hey, every day it could be wonderful. Every day it could be wonderful. It could be so wonderful.
Wonderful Every Day by Chance the Rapper and the Social Experiment. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we spend the rest of the hour with Julian Castro, the 2020 Democratic presidential candidate who joins us from Davenport, Iowa. Hailed as the breakout front runner in the debate, winner of the first debate, along with Elizabeth Warren, of 20 people who debated over the 2 days. We're going to turn to a clip right now from that very first debate last month when Julian Castro and former Texas Congress member Beto O'Rourke clashed over immigration. This begins with the moderator, Jose Diaz-Balart of Telemundo, who raised the issue of undocumented children held in detention and the image of Oscar Roberto Martinez Ramirez and his daughter Valeria, who died attempting to cross the Rio Grande after fleeing El Salvador. Diaz-Balart directed the question to Julian Castro.
Let's be very clear. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that. I just think it's a mistake, Bethel. I think it's a mistake. And I think that if you truly want to change the system, then we got to repeal that section. If not, then it might as well be the same policy.
Let me respond to this very briefly. Actually, as a member of Congress, I helped to introduce legislation that would ensure that we don't criminalize those who are seeking asylum and refuge in this country. If you're fleeing desperation, then I want to make sure that you're treated with respect.
I'm still talking about everybody else.
But you're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws.
That's not true.
And if we do that, I don't think it's asking too much for people to follow our laws when they come to this country. I'm talking about millions of folks. A lot of folks that are coming are not seeking asylum. A lot of them are undocumented immigrants, right? And you said recently that the reason you didn't want to repeal Section 1325 was because you were concerned about human trafficking and drug trafficking. But let me tell you what, Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21, and Title 22 already cover human trafficking and drug trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
This is an issue that we should.
That was the exchange between Secretary Castro and Beto O'Rourke in the first Democratic presidential debate. Julian Castro, could you summarize what the differences were between you and Beto O'Rourke there? And also, could you talk about the fact that as a member of the Obama administration, President Obama himself took much criticism for being called by many of the Latino civil rights group as the deporter-in-chief because of the massive deportations that occurred under his administration?
So we were having a discussion on that first debate about whether Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act should be repealed. I believe that it should be repealed. And this act essentially is what says that it's a misdemeanor crime to cross the border. This act was passed in 1929, but between 1929 and about 2004, it actually was rarely enforced. Border crossing was rarely enforced as a crime. Instead, it was just treated as a civil violation, and people who crossed were subject to deportation, but that's a civil process. It started to be weaponized to a much greater extent by this Trump administration. That section was weaponized to charge migrant parents with a crime and then use that to separate them from their little children. So my point has been, look, we can go back to the way that we used to treat these things as a civil violation and get rid of this law that allows this administration and would allow some future administration perhaps to weaponize it and to separate migrant parents from their children. I've said I want to guarantee that we never see this kind of family separation, this cruel family separation again. And the only way to help guarantee that is to repeal that section. Congressman O'Rourke has refused to say that he would do that. He says that he had said that there were other things that we could do, and Senator Warren, a number of other people who are running. In fact, I think 8 out of 10 people the next night they were asked would you repeal Section 1325, 8 out of 10 of the people standing on that stage said that yes, they would. And so I'm glad that about half of the Democrats that are running in 2020 recognize that we have to do that. I was part of the Obama administration. Before I was part of the Obama administration, when I was mayor of San Antonio, I recognized some of the shortcomings of the administration when it came to this issue of immigration. I was critical of the administration for some of the things that it was doing. I believe that in some ways the administration did get better as time went by. You think about DACA and DAPA, the protections that it tried to offer to those young people and also their parents. But look, Republicans and Democrats, it's true, have not done what needs to be done on this issue. And I've put forward what I call a people-first immigration plan that would do this 21st century Marshall Plan with Central America, that would put all undocumented immigrants, dreamers and their parents, but not only them, all undocumented immigrants who have not committed a serious crime, which is the vast majority, are law-abiding folks here in the U.S. I would put them on a pathway to citizenship. I would also bring back thousands of veterans who have been deported, who served our country honorably, and create an independent immigration judiciary so that we have enough judges and support staff to actually get through these asylum claims and these cases in a more timely way. And then finally, I would improve the legal immigration system that we have by making family reunification more possible. There are 4.4 million family members out there of people who are in the United States who we should reach out to and allow to apply for citizenship and do that in a more timely manner. And we don't take in the number of refugees on an annual basis that even Congress has allowed for the country to take in. They set that at 110,000 refugees annually in the late 1970s or early 1980s. Right now, it's between 30 and 40,000. I believe that we should at least go up to that cap of 110,000. Those are some of the things that my immigration plan would do.
Secretary Castro, on Monday, Amazon warehouse workers walked out during the first of 2 days of the company's yearly sale for its Prime members, known as Prime Day, one of the online retailer's biggest shopping days of the year. Workers at the fulfillment center in Minnesota protested dangerous working conditions, wage practices, lack of job security. You tweeted in support of the workers, writing, "A company worth $1 trillion can absolutely afford to provide reasonable conditions for its employees. My campaign is proud to stand with Amazon warehouse workers this Prime Day and will continue fighting for an economy that works for all Americans." We also understand that you're going out today in Davenport, Iowa, where you are, to stand with McDonald's workers. They protested yesterday in Des Moines. The strike's calling for higher wages expected through Wednesday. Is it true you're going to be walking with the McDonald's workers to discuss a boost to fast food wages? So Amazon and McDonald's and how that fits into your bigger economic picture if you were president.
I'm proud to do it. About a month and a half ago, I was in Durham, North Carolina, to join McDonald's workers who are striking there in their fight for a minimum wage of $15 an hour and better working conditions and the ability to more effectively organize. A couple weeks before that, I had stood with workers out at the University of California at San Francisco who were striking around conditions there. Amazon last year, as many of the folks watching will know, they made more than $11 billion in profit, but paid no federal tax. In fact, they got a $129 million tax rebate. And yet they can't pay their workers decent wages or allow them to take something as simple as a bathroom break that is of sufficient amount of time for folks to be comfortable. These are the kinds of working conditions that they have in some of these warehouses. And I'm absolutely proud to join Amazon workers who are on strike. My campaign is happy to highlight that. How this fits into what I see for us in the years ahead is that my vision for the United States is that we be the most prosperous nation on earth in the 21st century, but that prosperity has to mean prosperity for everybody. That means that we need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour so that people can make a decent living, or at least enough to provide for their family and pay the rent. Because right now there's not a single county in the United States where if you're working full-time minimum wage that you can afford a two-bedroom apartment, the rent on a two-bedroom apartment. We need to ensure that people are able to organize themselves into labor unions more effectively, because we know that throughout our history, the strength of unions has helped to ensure that people have better working conditions and that they have better wages. We know in the United States that even over the last 4 decades, as productivity, worker productivity has gone up tremendously by United States workers, that their wages have not kept pace at all, even as things like the rent have gone through the roof, so to speak. So it is time for us to go in a different direction from this Reagan-era approach where we think if we just treat everybody at the top and wealthy corporations very well, that that's going to trickle down to the workers. We have seen that that failed definitively. And we have the evidence of that in workers who are struggling to be able to pay the rent, people who are having to double up out there, people that are sleeping in their cars, more people who are sleeping on the streets, and folks that are not able to achieve their dreams in this country. So I believe that we need to go in that better direction where everybody gets paid a decent wage, and that's what I'm trying to champion in this campaign.
Secretary Castro, I wanted to ask you about another exchange that happened in the debates. You were asked about what you consider to be in the first presidential debate, the greatest geopolitical threats to the United States, and you said that they were climate change and China. Why do you see China as a geopolitical threat to the United States?
Well, I see China as a country that we have to be smart about, and that if we don't forge the right alliances around the world, can present a growing threat to the United States. It's estimated that by 2030, China is going to eclipse the United States in terms of its economic strength. It's going to be the biggest economy in the world. It's growing in military strength. It's also true that China has a very different ideology and perspective from the United States. I believe that the United States should continue to champion things like freedom and democracy for people and opportunity for people, but not do it in the way that we sometimes have done, whether it's propping up dictators in Central America or getting into needless wars in places like Iraq. But still, there is a difference in approach. And my point at that debate was that we need to forge alliances now more than ever before in Latin America, in Africa. We need to repair our European alliances to ensure that this push toward more freedom and more openness continues in the years to come, and that we don't go in the other direction that I think in many ways China represents.
You were one of many Democratic presidential candidates to skip the AIPAC meeting, not to address it, the American-Israel political action group. Why?
Well, first of all, I think when it came to AIPAC that I got a request, and didn't get a formal request, but got an inquiry maybe 2 weeks before that event. And our schedule is packed right now, and so I wasn't able to go. But I also have expressed my reservations about the Netanyahu administration's willingness to make the moves that I believe Israel ought to make to ensure that we have a two-state solution in the future, and that the basic human rights of Palestinians are respected. Now, I see Israel as a strong ally of the United States, and I believe that we need to maintain that strong relationship. But I also believe that this administration has gone too far in one direction, and that the United States needs to hold our friends accountable.
We have to leave it there.
Julian
Castro, thank you so much for being with us. 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.